also makes sense to work with these kind of pictures or things in the daily work, be it with children or with grown-ups. Now, what does that mean? It is not only the positive things or negative things. It's not only that the people without ADHD have more positive situations, they have also shortcomings. If you have a pre-filter, the variety that you usually think is smaller. In daily life, this is an advantage. But as soon as you have to do innovative things, as soon as you have to do improvising, then this might be a disadvantage. And in these areas, then the people with ADHD, they have a big advantage. So it's not only disadvantage that we have when we have ADHD. Now I want to give you an example of the significance of this, what that leads to. People with ADHD have a different learning curve. And this is especially in professional life, but also in education, it is very important. Namely, if you have a person without ADHD, and this person comes to a new situation, a new job, or has to start to a new area to learn, then this person makes somehow the motorways over this whole system. So it first just takes these big lines of a new area. So that the result is you have very quickly you have an overview and you can start to work in that area. And of course, then after some time, you learn more. Now, if you have ADHD, it's quite different because things are not so much in a weighted way. If you have not developed a manual way of weighting things, then you try to take in everything because it's much less possible to differentiate between important and less important. So it works like that. If you try to take in everything, of course that doesn't work, so you go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And subjectively, one has then the impression one does not know anything, one does not check anything. So the curve goes very low. That goes until one reaches, let's say, 70% of an area, and then things put together. And then from one day to the next, one knows more or less anything. I experienced that myself as a student 45 years ago. In biochemistry, at the beginning, I did not get anything. For the first 2 months, I just had the impression, what are they talking about? I have no idea. And that was I did not know that kind of thing because in science I was very good at that time. So I thought, what happens? I don't anything. The best thing was most of the other students, they had the same experience. But after 2 months, suddenly one asked me, I don't get it. What is that, Heiner? And I said, blah, 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 blah. I told him everything. I did not know it myself that I have understood it before. And at that time, I did not know anything about ADHD, so I had no idea. I was somehow, I thought, God, what happens with me? Am I crazy or what? But from one day to the other, suddenly I understood it. Things have been put together in my brain. That's exactly what happens, and I've interviewed many people with ADHD in my life, and most of them know that. No matter what kind of intelligence range, in their way, they know it. And time and again, I wonder why it's nowhere described. I don't know why. Anyways, that is very important because what is happening, if you go to a new workplace and you have ADHD and you don't know it, then it might be that you think that you are in a secure position. I had once a patient, she was a young woman, Now, she was a middle-aged woman, and the following thing happened. She grew up in a little village. She had an apprenticeship. Then she was asked by a friend of her family if she would make the office in a garage of this friend who started to build up a garage and car sales. In a car sale. So she did that for him, and for a time of 20 years, she developed herself together with this, no, I don't get the word. This business, yes. So she knew every little detail in that business. After 20 years, the owner of that business told her, well, I would like to keep you, but I don't want to stand in your way if you want to go up in your career and find something better. And he paid her further education, and then she applied for jobs not in that small village, but then in Zurich, in a big firm, and she was accepted because her credentials were very good. So she went there, and after 2 weeks she was out again because she had no idea. She could not orient herself. She had ADHD but did not know it. So she was thrown out during the probation. And that happened 2 or 3 times, and she was totally off base after that. Then she got even divorced. Her husband did not want to know her anymore, and then she ended up in a psychiatric clinic, had a diagnosis of depression, and in fact, she was close to being getting the invalid rent pension. But then there was a young woman doctor who realized this woman has ADHD and made the diagnosis, and then she came in treatment. So the thing was like that, her curve was like that, she really went down, and then the diagnosis was made, and then she started to work with knowing how the ADHD worked. And she got to understand, well, it was not because I was stupid that I was thrown out. I simply did not know how much that I knew at the old place, because she knew everything. She knew who had an affair with who and everything. So that gave her quite a clear picture, and she was secure. But she also knew the prices of all the cars and the specifications and whatever she had to know. So, but at the new place, she did not know anything, but she was not aware what kind of rich background she had at the first one. So having understood that, she started totally new, and she thought about what were her dreams, and she realized she always wanted to be like adult educator, like giving lectures for adult people and giving training courses for adult people. So she did the whole training for herself and started a new career and was very successful in that. But she needed to know how she functioned. It was not only the medication was very important for her, but it was even more important was to know why she worked like that and why this was like this. Because without knowing the functional things, she would have always thought, well, I mean, she would have stayed with the low self-esteem, because she would have as many ADHD people make, well, I'm sick, I only function if I take medication. So this is the wrong way of looking at things. It's not really being sick, it's an advantage and a disadvantage, and one can use the medication for certain specific things, or also for all the time, but not because it's kind of thick, but because one needs less energy. One does not throw away the energy by taking the medication, and in that way one can be more effective. Okay, so it demonstrates how important that is. Now another, even let's say more simple way how that is important is, if one has less overview, one has to very often does not know which of all the possible thoughts in one's mind are the relevant ones and which one should follow. So quite often what one can observe with people with ADHD, if they are asked, well, could you do that for me? Okay. So it goes like that. I mean, we all know that. In Switzerland, we have a lot of clubs. For everything, we have clubs. And in these clubs, those who do the accounting, who do all the protocol, all these kind of things, it's always the ADHD people. Because as soon as somebody says, well, who could do that? Everyone goes down. And the ADHD people, who has already 4 jobs, thinks, well, I don't do enough for this club. So maybe I should do that. So it's difficult to decide. So it sometimes seems it's more easy to say yes. But of course, to say yes is easy, that's true. But then to do all the things and to forget them and then do them in the night before of the next assembly, this is quite difficult. So, but that happens a lot. It happens in private life, in private relationships, as we heard yesterday. It's exactly this kind of things. If we don't have an overview, how much I'm allowed to ask for me and how much I should give to the other one. I mean, then one does too much, but then one is not a partner anymore, but a butler. And nobody wants a butler as a partner. At least not for long. It's quite dull. Anyways, so that is a question of setting limits in private life, but very much in professional life, because usually if that happens, one ends up, as everyone can think, one ends up in a burnout or something like that, however we want to call that. So this is very important to keep that in mind. Setting limits is not just we are not able to do this, but we have too many varieties, so we assume it's more easy to say yes, and we should be on the safe side, but actually we are not. We are on the really bad side because everything goes down with that. So presumably most burnout clinics, at least in Switzerland, could not exist without ADHD. But they don't pay us for that. So it is very important to understand the functioning and to use models that everyone can understand. We don't have to talk about limbic system or about the locus coeruleus or about prefrontal specificities and all that kind of things, because normally we don't know ourselves. I mean, I say now, we medical doctors, we don't really know that exactly what that means. But if we use models that describe these things, then we can deal with it. Everyone can deal with that then to a degree. Here just a few hints how we can deal with these things. We need clear work structures, as we heard before. And one of the things that is very important, we need clear hierarchies. And hierarchy does not mean someone is better. It's only he has another position. It's only a function. It's not a rating, actually. And most ADHD people have to understand that first. A hierarchical higher position does not mean the other one is better as a human. It's only a function. And what really is important, as the more intelligent an ADHDer is, the more he has to be reminded, look at your contract. What is really your job? The less intelligent ADHDers, they are much more intelligent in these kind of things. So one has to be very careful, because the intelligent ADHD they can seduce you to believe that they know and that they are secure. Be sure that even the most secure ADHD inside, they are really insecure, and they fight with that a lot. They will be, maybe they first put up their defenses when you address these things, but very fast, usually they are glad to be reminded on that and to be able to talk about these things. Now let's go to the second to the second model that is very important to use. It's the control model, as it had been described many times, but in different ways. So it's about the executive functions. They are, so these would be the executive functions. And one important thing is always to point out these functions are totally normal with ADHD people. It's the control and the dosing of this function that is a problem. So people with ADHD are not less capable of concentrate. They need certain conditions that they can activate their concentration. And it's quite a difference. I know a couple of psychiatry professors in Switzerland that have not understood that till today. It's incredible, but it's the truth. I mean, we all know about hyperfocusing. If we would have less capacity to concentrate, it wouldn't be of any use to hyperconcentrate, because it would not be possible. If there would not be the capacity to concentrate, there would be no hyperfocusing. So we have to really keep that in mind. The capacity to focus, the capacity to concentrate is not less than with non-ADHDers. But we need different kind of, or special kind of preconditions to activate these kind of functions. And this is not only with concentrating, but with everything else of these executive functions. Now, when I said about hyperfocusing, so when there is an intrinsic interest, as we know, then with ADHD we can hyperfocus. What sometimes is difficult, or not everybody understands, is what is meant by intrinsic interest. Quite often interest and wish is mixed up, at least in Switzerland and Germany and Austria, where I usually talk about ADHD. You see, interest means, I can make it with a comparison. I could say I'm interested in knowing Chinese, but I will never learn Chinese because I'm not at all interested in learning Chinese. So if I'm, while my daughter, I don't know why, but from very little on, she was really interested in Russian language. So she started to learn Russian as a small child, and today she speaks Russian. So that is intrinsic interest. So then when the thing ahead that one have to do now, I'm interested in that. That is meant with intrinsic interest, and not my wish. It would be nice to know Chinese or something like that. So anyways, so then we can hyperfocus. And we know that in the state of hyperfocusing, people with ADHD can really do great things. As I point out here with this picture, one can study for hours on, and one can really do things longer and better than comparable people without ADHD. Now, everything with ADHD has two sides. There are side effects of positive hyperfocusing. I want just to point out one, and we always should keep these things in a functional thing, not to put us higher than others, but in order to be cautious. Let's make use of positive hyperfocusing, but be aware of its dangers. So if an ADHD knows his field well, is intrinsically interested, is unrestrictedly associating, develops an idea and is enthusiastic about it, and has a complete hyperfocus on it, and as a bonus has a reduced impulse control, then the risk of communication difficulties is enormous. So if we draw that, A would be the ADHDer, B the non-ADHDer, and then the ADHDer lets out all his thoughts and ideas in a flow like a waterfall, Niagara Falls or something like that. And then, of course, only very little goes into this tube B. And the rest of it, outside, you get sticky of it, of all these ideas. So, of course, B does not accept these ideas. He says, crazy you, or whatever. Huh? He rejects everything. And of course, A feels, I'm surrounded by idiots. I mean, that's a feeling that I think every intelligent ADHDer knows very well. And I can understand that, I have that very often, but it's not true. Because also the non-ADHDers are not just idiots, they are many of them are very intelligent people as well. So we have to be careful not to become arrogant. But it's understandable that this happens. Now, of course, if then B realizes the next day that A was right, that the ADHD, of course, then he feels himself caught as him being the idiot. So, of course, he rejects even more. So that's just human. So we have to find a way how to deal with that. And the solution, at least it seems quite simple, is a funnel. But what does that mean? So if we ADHDers start to understand that the rest of the world is not just inhabited by idiots, then we can also, then it's not a question of we are rejected, because this feeling, underlying feeling of nobody sees how intelligent I am, nobody sees my qualities, they always only see my negative sides. We can understand that we dwell in that, but we should try to keep a clear view on these things. And if we start to realize the other person is maybe also intelligent, I have just to adapt my speed to promote my idea. And that does not mean I have to go on an idiot level. It means I give my own idea a chance to hit. And that is what I think we really have to learn. And that is something we can learn. I have seen so many patients who've learned that. But if we don't learn that in advance, then it can have a lot of difficulties in life. This was an example. This is an example of an engineer who came to Switzerland to work in a biscuit factory. And then and his job was to find new ways of production, better ones and so forth. He had great ideas, and he flooded everyone with these ideas, and everyone was pissed off because everyone was afraid if he goes through with these ideas, I'll lose my job. So, and nobody really understood what he was saying. And then even he was a Belgian and not a Swiss, and we Swiss, of course, we know best how to make biscuits and all that kind of thing too. So he really had difficulties. All his ideas were rejected, and finally he got the notice to quit. Half a year later, all his ideas were taken up again, but he was out already. This kind of story, I mean, I don't know if you know that kind. I know tons of story like that. And usually it's intelligent ADHDers who do not know about ADHD, or they know about ADHD but have no idea about possible side effects of positive hyperfocusing. So we really have to tell people positive hyperfocusing is one of the greatest things, but be aware of possible side effects. Now, I want to talk about something else that I am always astonished that there is not much focus on it. In most areas, one also only talks about hyperfocusing in the sense of positive hyperfocus. But of course, not only things that interesting can have a tunnel vision, but also when we make a mistake or we are criticized or something like that, anything negative can also trigger a hyperfocus. And this is one of the worst things in the life of ADHD. And I'm really astonished that there is no literature about that. When I started some 20 years ago with working with ADHD, it was one of the first things that sprang to my eye. There is negative hyperfocus, and then I Googled nothing, just nothing. And up to today, I think there is no real literature about that. So I started out at that time to conceptualize, to observe, make observations, but also how to deal with it. Now let's first look at what it is. You see, when this square thing would be the whole person, on the scale there, this little blue guy. And there is a point of criticism, or one makes a mistake. Of course, then that would not make quite a difference. One could look at it, see, well, this criticism is okay, and I learned something, or this is totally unjust, or something like that. Then we can deal with that. But if there is a tunnel vision, if there is a negative hyperfocus, then in the extreme, it would seem subjectively to us, I exist only out of this mistake. So then it seems my whole personality, everything that I am, is not on the scale anymore. So the smallest criticism could switch the scale. And that is what happens subjectively and emotionally. That is, of course, then a very small incident can feel as if one is devastatingly attacked. One has subjectively the impression the other one is totally denying me, he is totally making me down, he has never ever accepted anything of me, and of course I now see it right. He is really the worst person and not me. I don't have anything. And then, of course, the situation feels much more extreme, and of course the feelings are then logically much more extreme, and of course the impulses are much higher and much more difficult to control. So if this happens, of course, then there are escalations that all of you know from your work and probably also privately. These kind of escalations are never productive. They are always destructive. So it's one of them, and there are a lot of suffering. They mean a lot of suffering for everyone involved, the ADHD himself or anyone else. So it is one of the most important things to start to know these things and to start to deal with it. Now, I will not talk much about the dealing with that, only one point. The first thing, of course, is one has to start to be able to recognize that oneself is in a negative hyperfocus, because otherwise, as long as one is in it and one doesn't realize it, one has the subjective impression, finally I see how this world works. Now, I see clear as I never seen before. One would not question oneself, but it is actually quite easy to diagnose that with oneself, that one is in a negative hyperfocus. One just has to remember, one of the things that is always happening in a negative hyperfocus is one has extreme feelings. So one can try to, and this is actually working most of the time, to develop a reflex that as soon as one realizes one has very strong feelings, that one asks oneself, could it be that right now I am in a negative hyperfocus? So just this question, Not, I mean, of course, not every strong feeling is a negative hyperfocus per se. But just, could it be? So one goes one little step outside of oneself. And most people learn then to realize, okay, that is a negative hyperfocus. And if one realizes it, one has to just know one thing. You can never trust your own feelings when you're in a negative hyperfocusing. Otherwise, okay, you can trust most of the time. But inside the negative hyperfocus, you can never trust your own emotional evaluation of a situation. Just never. So you just have to wait. But then there are other ways of how to deal with that I have described in my book. I think this is one of the very important things, how to learn about negative hyperfocusing, to learn how to recognize it, to learn, of course, how to prevent it, but also to learn how to get oneself out of a negative hyperfocus. So, to make it short, ADHDers are no raw eggs. It's wrong what you can read everywhere that ADHDers cannot accept criticism. That is only the case if they are in a negative hyperfocus. And if you criticize an ADHDer in the appropriate way, which means you have to first make sure that he realizes that I accept him and never try to act that. Because my experience is every ADHDer, if I try to act, I respect you, sugar, 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 they realize that you cannot trick them. So if you really accept someone and you relate that to him, then you can criticize as hard as you want. It has to be true, of course, but my experience is you don't have to keep back anything. You can say, look, it's just not in that you do that. You know, I respect you. And I know all the things that you've done and what you can. But this, you're crazy. You dumbass. You can say whatever you want, as long as the respect is promoted. But you have to be sure that the other one really, he has, it's not you have to be convinced that you respect him. The other one has to, you have to make sure to realize that he, at that moment, not any time, but at that moment, that you respect him. Then you can criticize as much as you want. So, again, I want to say something positive. Maybe, with side effects. Of course, it's always to both sides. When you take the ref counter in a car, you see here on the left, it's a person without ADHD, and the right with ADHD. So in daily life, the person without ADHD is in the green area with 3,000 refs per minute. But the ADHD is close to orange. Now, if you have an emergency situation, the thing changes. The person without ADHD goes into the orange, and the ADHD comes into the green because the scale shifts as well. Now, how can we understand that? If we take schematic sequence like that, you have how much adrenaline or noradrenaline is active, and then how much the activation of the automatic filter is there. So if you have a rush of adrenaline of a non-ADHD person, it starts here, and then there's a little bit more activation of the filter. ADHD in daily life, one is much lower with the noradrenaline, so the same rush of adrenaline has a very big effect. We could say one goes above the fog level. So that is usual experience that most of you have in emergency situations, ADHDers usually function much more better than corresponding non-ADHDers. And that is the background of this. And of course, this is very practical in emergency situations, and many emergency doctors or another kind of or firefighters or what kind of that kind of professions, there are a lot of ADHDers. Now, what could be the problem? The problem usually is that what happens when the emergency situation is over? Then the adrenaline goes down again. And if the adrenaline goes down again, the filter goes down. And then many of these people, they suddenly don't see anymore, well, did I do the right thing? Because they cannot remember. And I experienced that as a young doctor. When I worked on the emergency station, it was no problem when there was an emergency. But afterwards, the people were in their bed. I woke up and thought, well, God damn it, probably I did not even stop the bleeding. So I got up, ran to the ward and checked. And usually, I mean, not usually, every time I had stopped the bleeding, there was nothing, but I did not know anymore. Then I thought maybe I did not check this or that, and I started to do all kinds of things. I was exhausted like anything. So anyways, I only stayed for quite a short time at that station, but if I would have wanted to become an emergency doctor, usually these kind of people with ADHD, if they don't know how they function, they quite often when they go home, they crash, they drink, they take drugs, or they may have any kind of horrible sex life with 10,000 of partners and no real relationships. So usually that is very difficult. And then they crash. Being 35, they are finished, or something like that. So it's really, it should not be. They have to know how they work. Because if you know how it works, then you can counteract these things. So unfortunately, that is what often happens with these people. Like this jumping flash, and then if it's finished, you drop and fall down outside of everything. Now, I want to come to conclusion.
Good timing.
Genau. As long as in medicine, especially in psychiatry, actually in medicine, it's not only symptoms, it's only in psychiatry that we reduced ourselves to symptomatic view. Symptoms is quite a rigid thing. And for example, in Switzerland and universities, as long as you go to basic science, there's very good work done in neurobiology, neuropsychology, and all these kind of things. Very good work. But if you look at clinical research, it's absolutely superficial because they only make these symptom lists, then they make a statistic, and then they come up with things like, well, the more heavy ADHD is, the more stress a person has. So simple things like that, this is not science, this is just ridiculous. I mean, everyone knows that this is the truth, it's evident without having to make a statistic or something like that. So I came across a book, maybe some of you know these books of Louise Penny. It's a Canadian writer who wrote a series of crime stories. They are philosophical, philosophical crime stories. And there is the wife of the chief inspector. She is in a librarian, and she says she is not only looking at the facts, she's at the relationship between the facts. And we have lost somehow in psychiatry to look at the relationships between facts. We only look at symptoms as so-called facts. So this is a very superficial way. functional overview, all picture, fluidly interconnecting things. We have to go back to this kind of thinking and exploring, researching. Research, science, research in the sense of exploring. It's like exploring a country, walking through it, smelling it, taking up, and then of course also statistics, but just as one of the means. In psychiatry, we have gone, I think, really the wrong way. And in that sense, I would also say the word ADHD is really wrong. Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is really giving a wrong impression. We should go back to a neutral way, which is even more appropriate, namely unusual management of information and function. It's neither better nor worse than non-ADHD. It's just different, and it has advantages. I mean, if 90% of a population would have ADHD and 10% non-ADHD, we know it wouldn't function, in spite of all the big ideas, but there would not be enough organizational capacity. But if we take 90% non-ADHD, 10% ADHD, high functional autism, and so on, then that functions quite well. So that is what I wanted to tell you. I wrote a lot about these things that I said now in my book, and it's also in English. It's Springer Verlag, ADHD and Success at Work. It's not only about ADHD at work, but actually it's just about ADHD. So thank you. So we have more possibility for questions.
So, any questions? For spurningar?
Heiner, thank you for describing my life. I said, thank you for describing my life.
Yeah, it's mine too.
It's not really a question, it's just a reflection on the hyperfocus. I was diagnosed back in 2000. Then in my 50s, when I was doing my master's thesis, I knew two things. I knew about hyperfocus. I knew that I could do it, but I knew I could use it.
You knew you could do it, but?
And I know I can use it, but I need to avoid certain things. So while writing the thesis, alone at home or in the countryside, I made sure I stood up every hour. Otherwise, I would hyperfocus for 4 hours, and it'll take me 4 hours to backtrack. So I knew how to use the trick. I knew how to then make use of the trick, but don't let it control me.
Yeah,
and the other thing in crisis, it's amazing. It's like I can slow time down.
Yeah.
I can ignore or reply to other people, but keep on doing it. But as you mentioned in one of your slides, the cost is energy drain. 15 minutes or 5 hours, I'll be done for the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how to make use of the knowledge. And then one can do things. Huh? That's great. And it's not a deficiency. Right. May I ask you to speak very clear, because I'm not I have a hearing device, but I don't hear very well.
Okay, I was wondering about the negative hyperfocus, because when I look at it, it really sounds like rumination. Are
like
there
what?
any rumination? The sticky kind of negative ruminating thoughts? Is there a difference there, or is it just like excessive rumination?
Well, rumination just means you eat, I mean, you turn over in your own things. And there is rumination also as a, let's say, psychodynamic defense mechanism. You know what a psychodynamic defense mechanism is. So you see, if you have unresolved feelings, for example, that you pushed into your unconscious, and you keep them there because you're afraid of your own feelings, I mean, the classic neurotic things. So then one of the defense mechanisms, how one can keep one's feelings in the unconscious, is, for example, by ruminating. And this looks exactly the same, for example, as many other. So there are many psychodynamics defense mechanisms that on the surface look the same as behavior that is with ADHD. But now rumination would only mean that you turn around and round and round. A person who is ruminating because of defense, like in a defense mechanism, it never ends. Never. But as a ADHD, if you're in a negative hyperfocus, and usually you have two waves. So the first wave would be, this guy is wrong, and blah, 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 and all this kind of turning. But inside that, you would have thousands of ideas, of course. But then after some time, the negative hyperfocus collapses, and then there comes the second wave. Well, how could I be so overwhelmingly nasty to the other person? And then one has a negative focus on oneself. I'm the worst person in this world and all that kind of thing. So there's a different kind of, you can differentiate that like that. Okay?
Yes, just thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm just thinking about one thing. It's often quite difficult to differentiate between ADHD symptoms and concentration and, for example, for anxiety. And I was thinking about the positive hyperfocus, because is that maybe the thing that differentiates maybe ADHD and anxiety, because it is like in anxiety, you don't hear that much about the positive hyperfocus. Do you think that is maybe one of the things that can help us discriminate between those two?
Yeah, that could be one of the things, but there are many things where you can differentiate that. If you have a person with ADHD who is in an anxiety state, if you offer clear orientation, the anxiety goes down much faster. Of course, it also goes down with a person who has, let's say, a classic anxiety disorder. In the long run, I mean, if you take the anamnesis of someone, I mean, I think you addressed that one. If you have a person who knows positive hyperfocusing, but also has anxiety attacks or something like that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and also because I just think that at least the positive hyperfocus is to concentrate on things for a very long time. It's not like a trait of maybe the anxious people. You see it as a trait of people with ADHD. So I was just thinking about the differential. We can find it there. Because it's difficult because we don't have that in the manuals to differentiate in the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that.
I'm just thinking about maybe that could be one of the reasons to help us differentiate between those two.
Yeah, I think you're right. And but then that has nothing to do with your question, but the point of the manuals, the diagnostic manuals, they only focus on symptoms. So that's the big problem of psychiatry. I mean, since DSM-4 and ICD-10, it's even written there. We focus on the symptoms and we leave away etiology and pathophysiology. I don't know how the medical associations accepted that from psychiatry. And for 30 years now, we work like that. I love to say it like that. Actually, psychiatry is the only field in medicine that differentiates human medicine from veterinological medicine. No, how do you say it? From the the Veterinärmedizin. Like the medicine of animals. Only psychiatry differentiates that. But psychiatry has the most superficial diagnostic system. It's crazy, huh? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lachenmeier. In my introduction of you, I talked about your zodiac sign, Sagittarius. Yeah, that's why people were laughing, and food. because on the internet it was stated that you like to taste food from different corners of the world. So I recommended the delicious traditional Icelandic fermented shark with a shot of aquavit or brennivin. So that's why people were laughing. So yeah, so you know, if you haven't tried it, definitely do so. I do not like it though, but thank you again for your very interesting and reassuring lecture. People with ADHD are very helpful, as we heard, saying yes to too many tasks, both in personal and professional life. And they're able to hyper-focus with all the positive things that comes along with it. But they also have to avoid to become arrogant. Well, some negative side effects that they have to be aware of with all the positive things. So it was really a great lecture for me, at least. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your stay in Iceland. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So now it's coffee break, and you know, coffee out there and toilets downstairs, and we also have an elevator for the toilets. Kaffi. Munið að taka í höndin á einhverjum sem að þið ekki þekkið og kynnið ykkur.